Greetings. If you recognize me, you probably know me as a chemistry professor, and indeed that is one of the roles that I have around here. Well, today I'd like to speak to you in one of my other roles. You see, in addition to being a professor, I am also the college's next door neighbor. Well, one of its next door neighbors, I should say. I'm the cranky one, trust me. Well, it is in that role that I'd like to say to you, if you are new to the college or to the college community, welcome to the neighborhood. And oh, by the way, in this neighborhood, we have a poison ivy problem. It's not a bad poison ivy problem. I've seen a lot worse than this place, trust me. But in my mind, any poison ivy around people is a problem. So in this video, I'd like to show you how to recognize poison ivy and hopefully convince you not to mess with the stuff. Now, I do this because I realize that not everybody arrives here knowing what poison ivy looks like. I remember when I first started teaching here, I had a student that I think grew up in an urban area, and he was, in addition to taking chemistry, he was also taking botany, so he had to go out in the woods and collect leaf samples, and he didn't know what poison ivy looked like, and so without taking any precautions, he came back with a bunch of poison ivy leaves. Now, I'm not one to laugh at the misfortune of my students. Oh, who am I kidding? Oh, that felt good. Well, I laugh because in this particular case, the student involved never actually developed symptoms. It's important to understand that you're probably not born sensitive to poison ivy. But when you're exposed to it, your body is reacting to it even if it doesn't develop symptoms. Over time, you can become sensitive enough such that you start to develop symptoms. My father, who passed away at age 90, never once got poison ivy rashes, and he was around poison ivy most of his life. I, on the other hand, around my late 20s started getting poison ivy symptoms, and boy howdy did I get it. So even though if you think you are impervious to poison ivy, it's a good idea to stay away from this stuff. So let's take a look at poison ivy and see what it looks like. Okay, didn't have to travel far to find a poison ivy plant. There are poison ivy plants all over the place. This is a classic poison ivy plant leaf shape. Let me go ahead and give it a light background so that you can see it better. Being very careful not to touch the leaves though. You'll notice leaves of three, let it be. That's an old saying, but a wise one. It has 3 leaflets. Notice there are points on each one of these. It's sort of oval with a point, with a long stem in the middle leaflet, and then in this at the top, sort of a tiny T shape. Usually the T shape that has a little bit of a reddish color. You'll also notice that the leaves, there's some indentations on it where the veins are, whatever the technical term for that is. I was never a botanist. But this is a classic poison ivy leaf. Now let's look at the rest of the plant. Okay, this is a poison ivy seedling. It's just a baby, isn't it cute? You'll note the characteristic leaves of 3, but you'll notice that this is just barely starting to grow. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Note that it's, even though it's a baby, I'm not particularly, I'm being very careful not to touch it. And its roots have not gone down very far. This plant is not that really established, but if you give it time, give it a few decades, it'll be spreading all over the place. So I got it now before anything bad happened. Okay, what does it look like after it's been growing for a while? Here's a plant that's a few years old. I'm not really sure how well you can see it, but Notice that this, although it looks like it's several different plants, this is probably one individual plant. And hopefully I can show that by trying to pull up. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to do a good job of it, but you notice that those roots are growing along the ground, and these are basically branches that are springing up from this. Now, different poison ivy plants can have different regional characteristics, so it's important to know what the poison ivy plants in your area look like. Okay, so if you want to know what poison ivy plants around you look like, the thing to do is to look for the plant that is actually the parent of all the poison ivy plants that you're seeing on the ground. Now, I'm curious, can you spot the parent here? I'll give you another minute. Very good, I hope. Hopefully you spotted it. But it's right up there. That is the parent of all of these poison ivy plants. You'll notice there are hairy vines growing up the tree, so-called aerial vines. And that plant is spreading out its branches, but it is also spreading out berries. Those berries are poison ivy seeds, and it will plant poison ivy seeds all through this area. It's usually easier to spot the parent than it is to spot the babies that are on the ground. Take a good look at this poison ivy plant. It's growing up the side of a tree, and not only is it thriving, but notice it's got berries. These are poison ivy seeds. When those berries ripen, they're going to get eaten by birds, and the birds are going to fly away and plant those poison ivy seeds in other locations. And so this is really a problem. But the main thing is recognize it as poison ivy. Let's take a closer look at those roots, shall we? Okay, this is a poison ivy plant that's growing on the side of a dead tree trunk. And you'll notice these vines have these what look like stems, but are actually aerial roots. You can see that it's somewhat hairy around there. This is a characteristic shape of the aerial roots of a poison ivy plant. Notice we got this big one here. This one's dead, but this one was probably the one that planted this one. And this poison ivy plant is growing up, and in a little while it's going to start producing berries. And so if you see that, give it a miss. And also if you see a stick on the ground that looks hairy, for heaven's sake, don't throw it in the fire, because the oils that are produced by the poison ivy plant, you can actually vaporize it, and you can develop symptoms from being exposed to the vapors. So be very careful around hairy sticks. I will go ahead and mention that just because something has leaves of 3 doesn't necessarily mean that it's poison ivy. So you should be able to spot things that are not poison ivy that have leaves of 3. And of course the classic example is right here. We have clover. Clover, definitely 3 leaflets, leaves of 3, but you don't have to let it be. Obviously it's a lot smaller than poison ivy, and it doesn't have the points on it, doesn't have the characteristic T-shape, but it does have leaves of 3. And St. Patrick used this to explain the concept of the Trinity in Ireland. It makes me wonder if St. Patrick had been in North America, would he have used poison ivy to explain the Trinity? Somehow I don't think so. Also, I've always wondered, is 4-leaf clover unlucky for a Trinitarian? While you're pondering that, let's take a look at another mimic of poison ivy. Now here's a plant that looks a lot like poison ivy, but isn't one. You'll notice the leaves have the same points on them. It's got the little T up there. It looks a lot like poison ivy to me, but you'll notice that this plant is definitely a shrub. It's not a vine, it's growing up shrub-like. Now I can say this is not poison ivy,
but I might not believe me unless I tested this. Okay, in about 3 days I will find out whether or not that's poison ivy, and if it is, I will I'll edit this to remove that. So don't try this at home. I am a trained professional. Always make sure that if you think it might be poison ivy, take it seriously. You don't want to be wrong.
Here's another poison ivy mimic. This one is kudzu. Here is kudzu, and so is this, and so is this. Kudzu, notice, has leaves of 3, if I can find one, yep. Leaves of 3, same general T shape. The leaf has a different texture, and so it should be easy to spot the difference between kudzu and poison ivy. You'll also notice that the vines are growing on the outside of the plant, not up the trunk. And the vines are not especially hairy, so it should be easy to spot the difference between kudzu and poison ivy. Kudzu is annoying. Kudzu was introduced into this country by some people trying to control soil erosion. Or at least that's the way the story goes, but I'm not buying it for a second. Kudzu, I'm convinced, is spread by flying saucers. Its purpose is to wear us down so our people will not be able to resist when their people invade Earth. Okay, this being the internet, I should say I'm kidding. There are some people out there that believe everything they see on the internet is true. Don't be that way. Don't even believe everything your professors tell you. Except for me. Do believe everything I say without question. And once again, I'm kidding. Kids these days. So that's what poison ivy plants look like. And I just will warn you that you really don't want to be touching poison ivy plants because of the oils that they will produce that will produce painful symptoms. I mean, it won't kill you, but it'll definitely suck all the joy out of life. Now, I will go ahead and say if you see poison ivy, you might want to let other people know and let people that are responsible for groundskeeping know where it is so they know how to deal with it, or just so that they don't get they don't develop symptoms as well. So that's it from your neighborhood professor saying stay away from poison ivy and get off my lawn.